Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Charlotte DeCoster, Senior Director at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. Thank you so much for joining us today for the second installation of our 2024 Summer Survivor Speaker Series. Today, you will hear from Lisa Kanarek, a second-generation survivor. That is the child of a Holocaust survivor who will share the story of her father, Dr. Joseph Kanarek. Before we begin today, I would like to thank our community partners for the Summer Survivor Speaker Series, the SMU Human Rights Program, and the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. We are grateful for your support of the museum and our programs. I would also like to extend a special welcome to the board members, and volunteers in our audience. We couldn't fulfill our mission without you. If you are interested in becoming a museum member or a volunteer, please visit our website at dhhrm.org to learn more. Also notice we have a little member table outside as well if you want more information on that in our lobby. In just a moment, Lisa will share her father's story with you. Then we will have time for questions and answers at the end. If you're joining us in person today, you can use the cards provided to you at check-in to write out your questions. Our staff will come around at the end of the program to collect your cards. If you are joining us virtually, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type out and submit your questions. I would also kindly like to ask everyone to silence your cell phones so that we may listen to Lisa's story without disruptions. Please also refrain from recording the presentation. We will post a recording of this talk on our YouTube channel in the coming days. And now it is my pleasure to turn things over to Lisa Kanarek.
Thank you, Charlotte, for that introduction, and welcome to the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. I'm Lisa Kanarek, and as Charlotte had said, I am a second-generation survivor. That means that my father was a survivor of the Holocaust. Today, he's going to share his story of struggling and of survival, and I'll fill in a few of the details. This is a branch from our family tree. I'm on top. I am the middle of 5 children. I have an older brother and sister and a younger brother and sister. My mom is on the left. On the right is my father, who was born in 1926 in Plonsk, Poland. It's a little close to Warsaw. And below him is his father, Herschel Kanarek, and Golda is his mother. So they lived in Plonsk, Poland, and they lived a very good life, and I want to tell you about more of their people and their family.
My mother's father was a furrier, and they also moved next door to my mother's family. So it was a natural occurrence that one would fall in love with the girl, and one with, of course, with my father, and that's what happened. We lived well in Poland at the time. We frequently saw our aunts and uncles and then cousins. Some were my age, some were older and younger.
So it was the perfect meet-cute story. My grandparents lived next door to each other. They met, they fell in love, got married, and they had my dad and his little sister, Rachel. So they had a good life where they got together with their grandparents, and life was good for them. I want to introduce you to a few more of the family members. At the top are my grandparents, Herschel and Golda Kanarek. Herschel was a farmer and a rancher. My father used to go with him to get cattle, to get the farm animals, and his mother was a seamstress. So she would sew for people in the neighborhood. Below that, the picture on the far left is Uncle Sam, and Sam Gardner. He was my father's first cousin. So you'll hear a little bit more about him as well. Next to him on the left are my grandparents, and then in the middle is Frank and Golda Lask. Frank was my grandmother's brother. He went to the World's Fair in New York before the war started. Once things started to get more dangerous for Jews living in Europe, he stayed. They told him to stay. And next to him are more family members, aunts, uncles, and cousins. In the middle is my father. As a little boy, he looks just like my little brother Eli. I look at that picture and I can't help but see such a perfect resemblance. And then his little sister Rachel. The photo on the right is of Uncle Sam's mother, Krusa, and then my grandmother, Golda. He grew up in Plonsk, Poland, and Plonsk had a very thriving Jewish community. There were universities, there were places for people to study, and my father had a very good life there. They had Friday night dinners with their family. They had aunts, uncles, and cousins. They would go skiing in the winter, and they would go swimming in the summer. It was a very good life for them. They went to a private Jewish school, he and his sister, and again, life was good. As my dad would always say, life was good until it wasn't, until Poland was invaded. My dad will tell you more about that.
Until we were invaded in September 1st, 1939. We didn't know what was in store for us, and so shortly after the invasion, our house was confiscated.
So the invasion began September 1939, and their life changed. My father's family was going to go to New York. They had planned to go to New York to be with their uncle before the war started. But then my grandfather was drafted into the Polish army, and his wife refused to leave, so the family stayed. Poland had the largest number of Jews in Europe, and almost immediately, they required all of the Jews to register with the Nazis. The Nazis' goal was to get rid of all the Jews in Europe. That was their primary goal. So they made people go down to the town squares, you can see on the left, and they were forced to register. They wanted to know who lived in their houses, how many people were there, their ages, and on the right, you will see men lined up in front of a police station. They're not being arrested, but they are being required to register. So they had to give all that information, but if someone decided not to register, there were other ways they could get the information. One was the census, they had the names. Also through the house of worship, their synagogues, they were able to find the names of the people. And they would have neighbors who would also tell them how they could find the Jews. So it was a very difficult time for them. And there were some other regulations that they gave, and I will have my father tell you.
Clouds started to roll into Poland, and from there on, once Germany occupied our city, things changed drastically. We had start wearing Star of David, yellow Star of David in front, and a round patch in the back. Men, women, children, every Jew had to wear one. Synagogue was taken over. We could not go to synagogue. Our house was confiscated, and we moved in with our grandparents. My parents had planned for me to go to Vienna to medical school, and they had deposited money in the bank, and we got a letter from the occupying powers at the time. We got a receipt for the money. They took it out.
So his house was confiscated, and his family had to move in with his grandparents. Also, his parents had put aside money for him to go to medical school. The Nazis came in, took all the money, gave them a receipt, but they cleared out their bank account. That was just starting with all the regulations, everything that they were putting in place. The next step was to round up the Jews and put them in ghettos. A ghetto is an enclosed area that keeps the Jews away from the non-Jews, whether fenced in, gated in, bricked in. And those were areas where only Jews could be. And as you saw the star in that video, that was my father's actual star that he had kept in a file cabinet in his home office for decades. I helped him about 3 weeks before he had died, and I helped him with his home office. I went through and found a folder with all this information. You'll see a few more of the things that I found. And one was the star. He had kept it all those years. So within the ghetto, the Jews had to wear stars, whether it was a patch or it was an armband, to show that they were Jewish. And it made it very clear to the Nazis who was not Jewish. So they also had to shop in stores only owned by Jewish business owners. They could only shop in those types of stores. There was a lot of starvation, there was disease, overcrowding. Several families lived in one apartment. It was a horrible way to live within the ghettos. Also, the men were sent every day out to forced labor. It's a very difficult time for the people in the ghetto. From there, they were sent to the death camps. The deportation was to Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's always hard to still say that, knowing that that's where my father was. The Nazis, their goal was, in setting up the death camps, to murder all Jews in Europe. That was their sole goal that they had. And so there were 3 ways that they transported them in trains. There were third-class passenger cars, which is most likely what my father's family went on. There were boxcars, and there were cattle cars. So they went on these trips days and days without food, without water, and throughout the trip, they would be on the tracks, open up the doors, throw out the dead bodies, close it, and keep going. There was no regard for human life, and I just can't imagine that my father was in that situation. Again, crowded in, 75, 100 or more people within one of those trains. And once they arrived at Auschwitz, there was a selection process. They divided the men on one side, the women, children, and elderly on the other. My father originally was in the line with his mother and his grandmother and his sister. When no one was looking, his father motioned to him to run over. He was able to run over and stay with his father. But when he looked back over at his mother and his sister and his grandmother, they were being led away to the gas chambers to be murdered. That's the last time he saw them. So he stayed with his father for 2 years in Auschwitz. They were working, it was hard labor for them, until his father was sent away to another camp, and he was eventually murdered. My father was there an additional year, and he had different jobs. One was in the kitchen, and he was cooking one day, working with knives, cut himself, and at the end of the day, he went to the infirmary. They took care of him, they did the small operation, stitched him up. He was laying down when the Nazi guards came in, and they would come in at least once a week to see who was ready to go back to hard labor and who would go to the gas chambers. They didn't have time for people to recover for weeks and weeks. A nurse got him up, got him dressed, and said, "Help me, just act like you're my assistant and help me." And my father said that's most likely what saved his life. That was a hard life in Auschwitz, and he'll tell you more about the conditions.
Our food consisted of bread in the morning. In the evening, we got a bowl of soup, but very watery. And that was it. People lost a lot of weight. As a matter of fact, someone who worked with me outside told me he was from Hungary, and he was very overweight, could never lose weight. He had lost at least 100 pounds. A very young person, too. And we had assembly twice a day, in the morning before we went to work, and there was an assembly in the evening. And if somebody was missing, for one reason or another, fell down or died on the way or whatever, we would stay there till they found that person. It could be rain, frost, it was winter, it was horrible. We had light clothes on.
So they had roll call in the morning and they had it in the evening. And keep in mind, they were wearing uniforms that were not heavy. They didn't have warm clothing, and they had to wait until everyone was accounted for. And if they weren't, they waited, and they waited, and they waited. They couldn't just go back to their barracks. So again, it was a very hard life for them. The Nazis were worried that the Russians were coming in, and they were going to liberate all the camps. So they put the prisoners on a death march. And there were 3 types of death marches. One was on foot. They would march. Again, they're not wearing warm clothing. This is January. And they're marching with the Nazi guards. The Nazi guards marched with them, but they were working in shifts. They weren't there for the days and days that all the prisoners were walking. And if they stopped, they were shot. If they sat down, they were shot. If they fell down, they were shot. So prisoners were helping each other to continue walking. The other was by cattle car, and the other was a combination of cattle car and walking. My father went by cattle car. He was sent to another camp on a death march in a cattle car. And to think of him being locked in like cattle as he's in a cattle car, I just can't believe people can treat people that way. So that was how he was able to go to the camp, and he'll tell you about his journey.
They took us from Poland to Czechoslovakia when we went through Czechoslovakia. Those were open cars. Then we got to Czechoslovakia, and the women coming from shopping would throw bread into our train. We were locked inside, but they threw it in, and some people died in the train. We got no other food until we got through. We got about 3-4 days, maybe 5 days, and there was no water, so it was snowing. So we just ate the snow. We finally arrived in Nordhausen. Dora was the camp, and when we arrived there, one of the Polish prisoners was a secretary, by the way, in the other camp, and he said, Joseph, that was my name, Polish, he says, they lost all the papers, so they don't know who was who, he says, because Jewish. So from then on, I was Polish.
So he was in a cattle car, locked in the cattle car, and when they stopped at one of the stations, women coming from the grocery or from the store had loaves of bread, and they threw that in over the top for the prisoners to eat. Just soaking that in, it's just hard to imagine that that's how he was transported. And once he was there, he knew one of the prisoners checking in all the other prisoners, and he said, take off that star, and then you'll become Polish, because it would give him a little better treatment to not have the Jewish star and instead to have that Polish badge. And you'll see those in the museum as well. You can see an exhibit of all of the different badges. So he arrived in Dora-Mittelbau Concentration Camp. That was on the side of a mountain. So that made it easier for them to build the V-1 and V-2 bombers that were very effective against the British. There was also talk of sabotage. You'll hear a little bit about that in a moment. But this was the place where people went in from Nordhausen. They would come in, and when they would hear the bombing, they would go in and try to seek shelter as well. But he worked in that camp, and I'll tell you about what he did. He'll give you that idea.
So we arrived there, and that's where when we were in Nordhausen, that was where they were making the V-1 and V-2s to shoot out to England. That was in the Harz Mountains. Inside, they opened a whole factory in there. So people started working there, and we were still controlled by the SS. Anyway, they were talking about sabotage that they were doing inside. So some of those V-1 and V-2 would then explode when they got there. That's what I heard after the war. So while I was there, too, he said, by the way, I work in a camp in the hospital. Session. He says, they need someone, so I went over there. Could go, and they welcomed me there, and they said, by the way, we want you to be in charge of any sickness that's going on, or report any people to the hospital. So that was great. So I stayed in the camp instead of going out to work in there again, I stayed there. That was it. And then the bombs started to come in to bomb where the V1 and V2 were being made. But they stopped making them because the Russians, no, the Americans were coming in. So they were coming in, they bombed the town. So they took all the town practically and put it in the mountain. It was in the mountain. It was difficult to hit it because there was a hole in the mountain, a cave. And so they started taking people out, put them in a train again, and putting them, marching in actually people out from camp. And they were going to Bergen, Belgium. So they were leaving. So I went up, most of the guys that were supposed to be with the group, I went up to the hospital to work there. And the German doctor that was in charge said that we thought that they're going to kill the people that couldn't walk. And he said, no, he says they will not. It's not official, he says, but I don't think they will do that. So I stayed with the group over there at the hospital, and everybody marched out. Next morning, we woke up. The towers were empty. No more people in the towers. We could see the people get out of the towers and run, the Nazis. And then within maybe an hour or two, we heard tanks coming in, American tanks. It was the 101st Army came in.
So he was working on the V1s, V2s, and then he was given an opportunity to work in the infirmary. He took that opportunity, but then the Americans were coming, and the Germans got nervous, and they said, we're going on another death march. So my father had the choice to either go on another death march to Bergen-Belsen, or he could stay in the hospital and risk being shot. He talked to the doctor, it was a German doctor, and the German doctor said, I don't think that's going to happen. He took the chance, he stayed, and in the morning, when he looked up the guard towers, as he had described, the Nazis were gone. They had taken the civilian clothing that the Jews had come in, and they took it and they left. They took off their uniforms, put on civilian clothing, and left. So he was left in the camp, and the 101st Army came in. He's going to give you that information about what happened. Wait, give that. In 1945, so this is April, so he was there from January to April. There was a liberation by the American Army, the 101st Army. And this is a document on the left. This is from the Nordhausen police. This is not from the Nazis, that shows that he was in a camp. It shows his number, and it was 79777. If you can see, this is most likely taken from a U.S. Army officer has taken that picture. So he's free. That was a bittersweet moment for my dad. He was no longer in a camp, no longer having to go on death marches, but he lost everyone. He didn't have a family. Even if he had gone back to Poland, to his home, someone most likely would be living there, or it had been destroyed. So he had no one left. So it was kind of, again, a bittersweet moment for him. He's going to tell you about the liberation.
Now, going back to our liberation, we couldn't believe it, that we were alive and that we were liberated. As a matter of fact, the Germans dropped rifles. They ran away to put civilian clothes on and ran, because those were SS. And they would either hunt them down and so on. Anyway, after that, I got a special papers from the local police, the German police, my number and everything else. And so we settled that my friends told me about the hospital and about being able to stay with the hospital. And two more people, they found a car. We got into the car. That was one of them. They took me with them, and we went to a town called Göttingen, Germany, Göttingen. And from Göttingen, we went to a small town called Goslar, Goslar, and they had a hotel just at the edge of town called Kinderbrunnen, the fountain of children. That people found Germans high up that they couldn't have any children would go there and supposedly get pregnant. So by the time we got there, the city, someone from the city drove out with us. We found a hotel and we stayed there to rehab. So we rehabbed. It was really, there was great. We were skiing in the mountain there. We had 3 meals, 2 squares a day. I picked up some weight. We all picked up extra weight. And the Germans, the town people were very nice to us. They brought clothing for us. I didn't have any underwear and pants and so on. So we got that. And in the meantime, I wanted to find out what was going on in the rest of the world.
So he went to rehabilitation. He went with some friends. He went to a place, he had said, Kinderbrunnen, there was another place, Lebensborn, and that is where the Nazis went with their wives to create a master race, the super race. And that was their goal in that place called Lebensborn. So once he's there, he's recovering, he's getting 3 square meals a day, he's eating, he is liberated, and he's able to help the U.S. Army with an Allied force. That's the card that he was given. And then on the left is his uniform as an aide with the Army. And then at the top are photos from him. There's a prisoner in the middle. He's on the left, and another prisoner on the right. And then, as I told you before about Uncle Sam, Sam Gardner, that's his first cousin, and that's a picture of them together, finally. The story with them, how they had reunited, is he had heard through other friends that Sam was still alive. So he packed his bag, took a train to see Sam. When he got to Sam's apartment, Sam had a bag, and he was getting ready to see my dad. So their paths almost crossed, but they were able to meet. So he'll tell you about the liberation and his journey, because now that he has been rehabilitated, he's put on some weight, he's going to take the journey to the United States. And that's something, again, the only way he could do that was through his uncle. You had to get sponsored. If you were going to come to the United States, you had to have a sponsor. His uncle lived in New York, and he was willing to sponsor my Uncle Sam and my dad.
So we went to the HIAS, H-I-A-S. It was Hebrew Aid Society. And they were getting together a group. There were women, they're in uniform, in the army, or through the army. Anyway, they were organizing a trip of orphans to the United States, or survivors mainly. And so I went back to Goslar, and Sam stayed in Frankfurt. So, to say goodbye to my friends that I stayed with and so on, they were still there. They were being resettled. So by the time I got back, I missed the first boat out of Europe. That was called, his first boat was called Marine Flasher, and it was an army ship, Red Cross ship, and part survivors. We didn't mix with the soldiers that were coming back. So in effect, that was the first time. Oh, by the way, I also got $10 in my pocket for the trip, and that was the first time I tasted Coca-Cola. It was horrible. I said, how can people drink that? And we got a lot of food. You know, we got seconds and thirds, whatever we want. And but the boat, our ship really, was zigzagging. We were afraid there were still U-boats in the ocean. So we arrived in New York. Sam went a week early. Mine was the Marine Perch. And we arrived in New York, actually. Let me see, the date was 19, yes. We were liberated December 44, as we said earlier. We arrived in New York May 24th, 1946. I was still a teenager. And Sam and my aunts waited for me at New York Harbor. We arrived the night before. We stayed in the port next to the Statue of Liberty. No respect at night at all.
Keep in mind how many decades later that was. And it was still emotional for him to wake up next to the Statue of Liberty, to be able to make it on the Marine Perch. My Uncle Sam and his aunt, Golda, and Frank were waiting for him in New York. He had missed that first boat. And so he was able to be in that Marine Flasher. He came in on the different boat, a different ship. So he's in the United States, and as you had said, he had $10 in his pocket. And I can guarantee he never drank Coke again growing up, and I never knew why until we did that video. This is the ticket that he had on the Marine Perch. He had saved that. Again, when I helped him with his home office to get everything organized, there was a folder that had the star, that had that ticket. It had money from the camps, things that he had kept for decades and decades. I am so happy that it didn't get destroyed in a fire. Our family had a fire at their house, and had his home office been on the other side of the house, all of that would have been destroyed. So I was just so happy it was on the other side. This is my parents, my mom and my dad, and this is a picture from a bar mitzvah, from my nephew's bar mitzvah. So my dad was in New York. He went to Columbia University, and he heard from a professor that he could go to Mexico on a scholarship. Remember way back when that money was taken away? He had wanted to go to medical school when he was younger. He was finally able to realize that dream, even after everything that he went through. So he went to Mexico City, went to medical school, and he met my mom. He met her at the Jewish Community Center, and she just told me a few weeks ago when I saw her that she ignored him. He was from Europe. She didn't want anything to do with him. And we saw how that turned out. And they dated, they married within about 3 months. And then they had my brother and I had my sister. Then they came to the United States for his pediatric residency. He was there, he joined a practice. I was born, then my little brother and little sister. He practiced until he was 88 years old. He was a pediatrician. And of course, being the person I am, I had to tease him and say, Dad, 88, you're a slacker. You didn't work any longer than that? I mean, that was a long time. He loved what he did. He absolutely loved being a pediatrician. He died at 94 in 2020. And if you were to look up his obituary and look up the page that has all of the comments from patients saying, you saved my life. You saved my daughter's life. Just the difference that he made. He was a well-respected pediatrician in Kansas City. From that time, he had 10 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. He never talked about the Holocaust growing up. We had little snippets, he'd tell little stories, but my mom really didn't want him to talk about it. She wanted him to move forward, not concentrate on his past. So I asked him when he was 71, because Steven Spielberg was doing the Shoah Project, and he was videotaping survivors. And I said, Dad, this is a perfect opportunity. Do you want to do it? He said, nope, I'm not ready. So he didn't talk about it. He didn't talk about his experiences. So finally at 91, I used a tactic used by other children. I asked my daughter to ask her grandfather if he would let me videotape him. And he said yes. That strategy worked. So we spent a few days videotaping him. And then anytime I saw him over the next 3 years, I would pull out my phone if he started to tell a story or if he started to sing a song, anything. I had him sing the Polish national anthem. He remembered all those songs, and I recorded those. And I still look back. I've kept his phone messages. If I want a good cry in the morning, I will play one of his phone messages just to keep his memory alive. So I did ask him 3 weeks before he died. I said, Dad, why did you wait so long to share your complete story? And he said, because I didn't want anyone to feel sorry for me. And that's the kind of person he was. He was that unselfish, that putting everyone's feelings before his own. So I'd like to leave you with a song. It's a Polish children's song called Don't Crow, Little Rooster, Don't Crow, that he sang with my niece. And then I'm happy to answer questions after.
Jak się kukuje, usypia myszy, mama była nocka, nie wyspała myszy. Cała noc wyspała, cała noc płakała, luna się na mysiu, luna moja mała. Good job.
It's been an honor to share my father's story. I appreciate you being here so much. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions after.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing your father's story with us. I think we're going to have some volunteers go around and pick up the cards. If you have questions, if you have a question, write it on your card, and if you want to hold it up, we'll come around and pick up those questions for you. I already got one question in.
I hope I answered.
Why is it important to you to share your father's story, and what inspires you to continuously share it over and over again?
Well, with the rise in anti-Semitism, we have to keep the story of the Holocaust alive. We can't let that happen again. And although my father didn't talk about the Holocaust or what he went through until later in life, he knew that we had to keep that alive. We had to keep telling people that story. We don't want another Holocaust. We don't want people to have to suffer through that. And so by sharing his message, I was very close with him, and by sharing his message, I'm hoping that I can keep that memory alive.
Did your father ever go back and visit any of the memorial sites?
Very good question. He did not. And I asked him several times. I said, Dad, I'll go with you to Poland. I want to go. I still want to go. I do want to do a trip to Auschwitz. I've only done a virtual one online. And he said, no, there's no one there. No one's left. I don't have a reason to go. So he wouldn't go.
When did your father learn English?
My father knew 9 languages, actually. He learned Spanish and went to medical school in Mexico, learning Spanish that quickly. So he learned it when he was in New York, and then went to medical school and learned it as he went. He had my mom enroll. He used to teach English as a second language in Mexico, and he convinced my mom, who's from Mexico, to enroll in the class. And she said, I'll go to the class, but do not call on me. You don't call on me. So, of course, my father called on her. And after class, they walked out together, and a few women sitting there said, she already started dating the teacher. They didn't realize they were already dating, but they signed up for more classes, apparently.
When your father was liberated, did the the Germans in town? Did they help him get to the hotel?
In one of the videos, he talks about how the Germans were nice to him, that they were kind to the Jews. So he was able to get help from them. He needed clothing, so they were giving him that. And so they were receptive to helping the Jews.
What was your father's outlook as you knew him later in life? Remorseful, hopeful, what?
I still have yet to meet anyone as positive as my father. Just, he never yelled at us. He didn't spank us, didn't hit us. He was always nice. He was just always kind. He didn't say anything bad about anyone. We couldn't say anything bad about our siblings or anyone. He stopped that. But he had such a good outlook on life. He would always say, life is good, life is good. And that's who he was.
Has knowing your father's story affected the way that you look at life?
Yes, actually. Knowing his story and then spending more time with him. So I moved to Dallas 36 years ago, so I was not in Kansas City with him. But as his health started declining, I came in town longer but more often, and started videotaping him more as well. And when he died, I think I became nicer because I wanted to carry on that legacy of the way he treated people. And I noticed I quit talking so bad about people at times, and I wanted to be kinder, and I think that affected it as well. And just, I'm proud of what he accomplished, of what he went through, and that he never threw that back on us to say, I went through all of this and you don't appreciate me or anything like that. And I do feel horrible at times for being a very rebellious teenager, but he was patient and he never yelled at us.
A lot of second generation do feel that there was a lot of impact in general from growing up to older. Did you, although he didn't talk about it as often when you were younger, do you feel it impacted your life in general, being a child of a survivor?
I think that it did, again, when I was older, not when I was younger, because I didn't take an interest in that. But the more I learned of his story, just the little snippets, I knew that we had to keep his story alive, keep his memories alive. But I think it impacted me in that I want to keep sharing that with others. And I know that there are other survivors, the parents who were angry, and they took it out on their kids. And that was not my experience at all. It was the opposite. That was probably a small group that does that. But it was not at all an impact in our life as far as negative. It was, if anything, positive. I was just talking to someone who was telling me they were going to a family reunion, and I have to see my cousins. And I thought, I would love to see cousins. I would love to have known my grandparents. I would love to have known his little sister. I'm sure she was a wonderful little girl, and I just wish that I had more family on my father's side.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, and thank you for everybody joining us today as well. We appreciate you coming, and thank you, Lisa, again for sharing this important story.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Let me grab my stuff.
Oh, I found it. I finally found it. It just blends in. I know. Sorry, I went so fast. Oh my gosh, she did great. No, I felt like I was like, okay, slow down. Thank you.
Yeah,